We've been going some 36, 37 weeks now, 38 weeks, I guess. The question will be, do we want to start over again? At one time, we had about 50 people showing up for this workshop. And I love doing it. And this is going to the 15th year I've been doing this. But if there isn't a perceived need for it, then we'll probably just not do it. Hi, Billy. Could I have a show of hands of those of you who would like to continue and would be willing to come back and go through the cycle? Oh, well. How about you, Billy? This is only your fourth time around. Fifth time, yeah. Well, in that case, we'll do it. I'm delighted. If there are only two of us here and something's happening and it's helping, then we'll do it. But it's expensive for us to rent this place. And our 7:30 meeting has been carrying this meeting for quite a while now in terms of finances. However, do we got enough people coming out at 7:30? We can do it, I guess, right, Marilyn?
We got lots of money.
We'll be self-supporting through their contributions. Well, that's okay. Well, it's all the same group, so I guess it's all in the family, right? Those of you who don't know, Marilyn is the treasurer of the Stairway Group. We have 3 meetings on Saturday. This one and 7:30 Big Book meeting and a 9:15 Language of the Heart meeting. And Marilyn is there for each meeting, as is Tom, who's been recording these sessions. Tom's recording 6 times a week now, which is amazing. He's got a library of stuff. Choke a horse. Thousands. If you're interested in the steps or the Big Book or the sponsorship workshop or the Language of the Heart meeting, see Tom. He's got it all. It's all on CDs. Got some stuff on DVDs now. So.
Can we do how are you with the As Bill Sees It? Start a meeting on that?
Oh.
Or as Jim sees it.
All right, well, as Jim sees it.
I don't know. 6 meetings a week, and I've been asked to do a sponsorship workshop at the 441 Club on Friday night. So, I don't know. I guess as long as, but I don't want to change anything with the Stairway Group. If we're going to do, we need to have a sponsorship workshop going here in Broward. We're doing one right now in Dade County, and people are turning out. In fact, every week we get more people for that one. We're looking for larger quarters there. So you never know how this stuff is going to go.
You going to Palm Beach?
Well, I'm in Palm Beach on Sundays. You didn't know that?
Yeah, Boca.
Yeah, Boca Pines. Not Palm Beach County.
Yeah.
All right, guys, that settles that then. We'll be back here, God willing, and a creek don't rise. Next week, same time, same place, and we'll be beginning.
What day does that start? Is there a couple days to this?
Pardon me?
Is there a couple days, or is it just one set today?
No, we'll be back here next Saturday.
Just saw Saturday.
Oh, just Saturday. Okay.
Just Saturday, yeah. Okay, now we're going to continue our discussion of the traditions. We need to be able to teach the traditions. It's critical that we do that. And of course, you know from your own experience that the traditions are almost a death knell to any meeting. If you advertise that you're going to be doing traditions, you're lucky to get half the people out for them. There seems to be some kind of an idea that the traditions are boring or not necessary or irrelevant. Of course, it's just the contrary. One of the things about the traditions which we need to keep in mind and we need to teach to our people is that these are spiritual principles. These are not just nice things to do. and they are applicable to not only to the groups and to the fellowship, but they're applicable to each individual. So it's real important for us to make sure that the people we sponsor at least get a feeling for the traditions as being important and something they would like to study, and urge them to get the language of the heart, this book right here, because this goes way, way, way beyond the 12 and 12. 12 and 12 is very scanty. It's spotty. In fact, the 12 and 12 is basically a regurgitation of some of the material which is in here about the traditions. The reason for that is that when in 1945 and 46, when Bill wrote the traditions, they were first published in the Grapevine. Grapevine started publication in 1944. And at first, of course, they were desperate to get anything to publish. Today, they're deluged with all kinds of crap coming in from all over the world. But in the early days, they had to hunt to get enough to fill out their little magazine. And so they kept going back to Bill, and he kept supplying them with stuff. And that's what this language of the heart is. These are the articles that Bill wrote for the Grapevine from 1944 through 1969. And the material in this book is something you can't find anywhere else. It does not appear anywhere else. It's some of the best stuff that Bill ever wrote. But during the interim between 1946 and 1950, when the traditions were adopted by the First International in Cleveland, Bill wrote extensively about the traditions, many, many articles, and they are all published here in this book. So if you want to know about the traditions, you get this book, and basically the whole first section of this book is devoted to the traditions and the issues which arise from or were the reasons the traditions were adopted in the first place. These are landmark articles because they deal with something that is unique to 12-step groups, to AA in particular. That is a form of organization which has absolutely no formal structure, which has no ability to enforce its edicts, which issues no orders, which is operated as a kind of a laissez-faire democracy or a benevolent dictatorship of the masses. Really, we're totally weird because we don't follow any of the rules that are generally accepted for running an organization of any size, from a grammar school club to the Congress of the United States. We're totally different. And what it means when we think about the word tradition, let's remember what that means. It does not say rules, regulations, bylaws. It says traditions. And that means that what we accept as the organic law of AA is really not a law at all. It is a restatement of the traditions which had come about through experience up to the time that Bill began to write them down. Just as with the 12 steps were a recital of what had happened in the 3.5 years preceding their writing. Through trial and error, they had come to these 12 steps. When the traditions really began way back before the big book was written, we know that because in the foreword to the first edition to the big book, we find several of the traditions already being enunciated, so that it had come clear to them even in the very early days that there could not be any requirement for membership other than desire to stop drinking, that there would be no dues or fees whatsoever, that this would not be an organization in the usual sense of that term, one of the most important principles enunciated in the traditions is the principle of group conscience. Now, when we stop and think about group conscience, we got to remember that the group conscience is really the combined conscience of the members of the group. In other words, the idea is that God will speak through each individual's conscience, and that coming together within the group conscience will reflect that. So group conscience is not some kind of popular democracy. It has to do with exactly the same thing the 11th step talks about, that we seek through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact, and that we ask only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. And that extends to our groups, the knowledge of God's will for the group and the power to carry out His will. Marilyn, could you hit the air conditioning, please? So you can see that there's a direct parallel between tradition 2 and the 11th step. In fact, all the way through the 12 steps, we find the same theme, that we are God-reliant rather than self-reliant. We are God-reliant rather than group-reliant. So then if you extend that just a little bit further, you begin to see how really important this is, that each individual within the group is being asked to search his or her own conscience, and if in confusion or backed up in any way on it, to seek knowledge of what God wants, and then to bring this to the table. And the consensus of all of these individual inspirations ought to be a rough approximation of God's will for that group. Now, it sounds unwieldy, it sounds as if it oughtn't to work at all, and yet it works quite well. And another thing that's important to remember is that group conscience, though it has no binding effect whatsoever on anybody, I mean, it cannot be enforced except through peer pressure. There's no AA police, there's no way of denying anybody the right to be a member. You can't be excommunicated from this outfit. And so once we accept that group conscience then is an unenforceable expression of the individual consciences of the members of the group when they came together and met together, a kind of a consensus group conscience, but not enforceable in any way. And people from the outside looking at this, they say, there's no way this outfit can operate. There's no way that AA can stick together. How in the world did they last all these nearly 70 years? And it is a mystery in some ways, but it becomes less and less of a mystery once we accept the truism that these traditions are spiritual principles. And once we recognize that the traditions are no different from what we've learned in working the steps, that life is a series of paradoxes. There's no straight line, reasonable way of a human being just doping all this stuff out. We could never figure it out ourselves. What we're really looking at with AA is an organization based on paradox. The way we stay together is by not staying together. Clarence Snyder, who was the last guy alive of those who helped write the Big Book, used to say that unity in AA is chaos. And what he meant by that was, so long as the affairs of AA are kept out of the control of anybody, except for a loving God as He expresses Himself through individuals and through the groups, we'll be okay. Our unity depends upon us not being united in the sense that ordinary groups are united. tied together by rules, regulations, and especially by fear. And if you look at any organization you belong to other than AA, you will find that behind every rule and regulation and bylaw there's fear. There's the threat of force of one kind or another, or the threat of punishment, the threat of consequences, the threat of fines. And some organizations, ecclesiastically inclined to use the threat of hell, damnation, eternal fire. I'm not saying that that stuff is wrong. I don't know whether it's right or wrong. All I know is that in AA, we don't use those kinds of threats, and the reason we don't have to is because alcoholism is like a self-cleaning oven. There isn't any doubt what's going to happen to any of us if we do not stop drinking and stay stopped. We've already seen that. We know that. Our first step showed us that. So now if we look at tradition 7, we're going to see if we can get through the rest of traditions today. We've covered the first 6. And the 7th tradition is one that we talk about all the time, that every AA group ought to be fully self-supporting, declining outside contribution. There's a very interesting corollary to that. Let's apply that to ourselves. In fact, I'm going to give you a really neat little thing. Some member of your group is kind of down and out and comes to you and asks to borrow money. And you might feel kind of queasy about saying no. But you feel better the moment you say, just use a kind of a version of the 7th tradition. Every AA ought to be fully self-supporting, declining outside contribution. Just leave out the word group. And the interesting thing is that that's literally so. You see, a big part of recovery is learning to stand on our own 2 feet, take responsibility for our lives, become self-supporting, become God-dependent rather than other-dependent. Because most of us, when we come in the door, have highly developed dependencies on other people, or perhaps on jobs or positions in life or whatever it is. But stand on our own 2 feet, not likely. And it gets real painful for some of the people who have gotten used to the fact that we depend upon them. Because suddenly they find us becoming independent. Well, we must. Bill made the comment, in fact it's in the language of the heart, he said that every disturbance I have, great or small, at the root of it is some dependency I've allowed to develop. And he said that along with that goes the consequent frustrations of demands and expectations. And he learned that from very, very, very hard experience, having gone through several years of severe depression and suicide thoughts, hardly able to function at times. So he knew, and when he finally figured out what the problem was, that he had become totally dependent upon his position in AA. And the young Turks were coming along and shoving him out. He was no longer the grand guru. They wanted him to be emeritus, retired, go sit in the background. I've been trying to pull that on me now for 20 years, and I won't do it. But then, I'm not trying to run this chicken outfit either. All I want to do is carry the message. Well, Bill got caught up in that. He got all jammed up in that. He wanted to retain the power and prestige which he had arrogated to himself as the fellowship developed, and it was given to him. And people looked to him to run things and make decisions, and the trustees looked to him to make decisions. And he got used to that. He got used to being the spokesman for AA. He got used to the fact that he was being offered honorary doctorates at Yale and so on and so on and so on. He even got used to the fact that he and Dr. Bob were getting royalties from the sales of the Big Book. In fact, he and Lois pretty much lived on that for a long time. Well, all of these dependencies, of course, meant that when they started shoving him out and wanting him to back off, he didn't want to do it. And he got real depressed. He was entirely dependent upon AA. When he figured that out and he stopped and he retired, he made a couple of speeches saying, I'm out of here. I'll be around, I'll consult and so on, but I'm no longer running the show. Then he started to recover. Same with us, and his experience is typical of the things that we experience. And so in Tradition 7, let's learn from it. Let's be self-supporting to our own contribution. The more and the closer we get to that, strangely enough, the better we feel. Now, this is not just a question of money. As a matter of fact, the Big Book's pretty specific about this. In the 9th chapter, the chapter Family Afterward, it tells us that financial recovery always follows spiritual recovery, never precedes it. So what's our first priority? Our first priority is not money, power, prestige, or getting back any of the stuff that we had. Our first priority, and this is what we teach our sponsees, is spiritual recovery. Remember what the Big Book tells us, and just before we get into the 4th step, that when the spiritual malady is overcome, then we straighten out mentally and physically. And unfortunately, many of the human solutionists out there, the professionals, have come to believe, and they preach all the time, the idea that first we got to get you well physically and mentally, then you can accept the spiritual life. Well, they're just backwards from the truth. And unfortunately, by doing that, a lot of people are still searching months and years later for some kind of physical and mental stability, and their spiritual life is still a mess. So it's real important for us to get our priorities straight. Therefore, Tradition 7, that we be self-supporting, applies not only to our groups, to AA as a whole, but certainly to us as individuals. Look at self-supporting as being independent except for our dependency on God. And once we look at it that way, it makes it very simple. In the early days, when they started trying to take money from people, they found that money always has strings attached. They found that the AA group ought to stay poor. Somewhere along the line, they came out with this nasty business of a prudent reserve. Prudent reserve got started in New York because New York's a business. They're running a business there, millions of dollars a year. But it doesn't have anything to do with groups. Why would a group need a prudent reserve? Either we're going to have a meeting and collect money for rent, or we're not. We put aside 3 or 4 months of operations for what? Just all it becomes is a bone that the so-called business meetings can argue about. Because money always causes trouble in AA, always. It comes out of fear, guys, and the traditions are not fear-based. These traditions are the truth. They are principles. They're not fear-based. Any more than the 12th tradition, the way it's always being used as if it were a fear-based tradition. That is, we're afraid that we might be discovered as being alcoholics. It's got nothing to do with fear of discovery. Anonymity is not there because we are afraid of being discovered. Anonymity is there because we are to stay humble, and we're to sacrifice our natural desire to have notoriety and acclaim and stardom. Therefore, we leave out our first names at the level of press, radio, films, and TV. There's nothing in the traditions that tells us that we should announce ourselves by first name only in our meetings. That's just a custom that's built up. In any event, we stay away from the temptations of money. We stay away from soliciting. You cannot If you had $10 billion and you wanted to leave $1 billion of those dollars to AA, it would be turned down. We wouldn't take it. If you were a member, there's some limitation. I think it's $5,000, $10,000, something like that. How much is it?
Two grand a year.
$2,000 a year, something like that. We very strictly limit the amount of money that can come in even from our members. You see, money has got nothing to do with recovery. Dependence upon a higher power and independence on things of the world and the things of the flesh, yes, that has everything to do with recovery. So Tradition 7 teaches us that. Tradition 8, Alcoholics Anonymous should remain forever non-professional, but our service centers may employ special workers. Well, this is a touchy subject these days. It didn't used to be so much of a problem, but with the advent of the proliferation of treatment centers and psych centers and drying out places and detoxes and halfway houses that have a lot of try to do a lot of recovery. Any place which bases its existence upon commercial success is a place that is very, very hard on people in recovery who work there. It's extremely difficult for people who have several years of sobriety, maybe many years, who go and get their certificate and then go to work for a treatment center as a counselor, because the treatment center had an agenda. And if you're working for them and you're taking their money, you got to follow that agenda. They got forms they use, and most treatment centers pay only lip service to AA and to God and the big book. Because after all, they're professionals and they believe that we are our feelings. They don't believe that we are our spirits. So it's and they want to teach us that the bridge of reason does extend to the new land of recovery, but it doesn't. Now, if you're working there, you got a tough road to hoe, because if you're taking people's money, you got to conform to their requirements. Plus the fact that by working there, you're taking money for doing what in 12-step work we would never take money for. There's some idiots around this town that are telling everybody I'm charged $200 for a 5th step now. That's pretty damn cheap. I'm going to up it to $500. My time is valuable. But this is the kind of ridiculous stuff that floats around. But obviously, if we're going to do 12-step work, the first rule of 12-step work, the first rule of being a sponsor, is you do it without demand or expectation of any kind of gain whatsoever, period. Period. The moment that becomes an issue, it destroys the whole concept. Remember what Bill told us back in his story? He said if an alcoholic failed to enlarge and perfect his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others, he can't survive. That's the truth. Actually, the ability and the opportunity to do sponsorship, to do 12-step work, is a great gift. It's one of the great gifts that we get from being in this program and working the steps with a good heart, is that we get the ability and we get the opportunity and we are given the power to be helpful to other people. And it is only with that that we are going to have long-term sobriety. Ultimately, it all boils down to this: whatever I've been given, am I giving it back? One of the paradoxes we learn in here is that we can't keep anything we're not willing to give away. Weird, isn't it? We can't get anything we want to badly. We may get it, but it'll turn to ashes in our mouth. It's just like when we learn these things, we learn the keys to a lot of things in life. The key to a healthy relationship, for example, is that both people agree that if either of them wishes to leave, the other will release with love And once that's agreed, they'll never split up. That's the paradox. The one thing that chases relationships apart is the feeling of being trapped, the feeling of being dominated, the feeling of being stifled and smothered. And the moment that's taken away, the moment we no longer are making scratch marks in the backs of people around us, when we are no longer taking people captive into our castles, the moment we say you can go, that's when they don't want to go. The urge to go disappears. It's amazing. So when we consider the traditions, we must consider them in the light of paradox, because they are paradoxical. And this business of having paid people, you see, in the beginning they all had offers, big offers. Bill was offered a huge job if he would just come to work for one of the big breweries. Huge job and a lot of money, and he was to be the spokesman for moderation. And he wanted that job. I mean, he was starving. He and Lois didn't have any money. In fact, he'd had to sell his house and made a lot of sacrifices to keep going. He wanted that job. He went to his group in New York and he laid it out for them. And they said, well, Bill, we trust you if this is what you feel you need to do, and it won't interfere or compromise in any way your spiritual work, go ahead. We think, however, that this is something that could be extremely dangerous for you. He thought about it and very reluctantly turned the job down. He was offered the honorary Doctor of Laws from Yale University. And finally, he had to write back to the president of Yale and thank him very much, but tell him that he wasn't able to accept the honor, and that it ought to be, if he wanted to honor this movement, to honor AA, but not him. In the early days, there was tremendously, it was a big issue, this business of professionalism. And they used to have big arguments about any time a secretary was hired. If the secretary was a member of the fellowship, they'd all start screaming, professionalism, professionalism. And Bill always fought with us, saying, look, we're asking people to devote themselves full time to the affairs of the fellowship. They need to be paid. Well, that's the way it eventuated. And of course, the eighth tradition says that our service centers may employ special workers. The word employ, of course, means that they're going to get paid. But other than that, we have very, very few people working for salaries in this huge organization with something now in excess of 5 million members in 140 countries and a budget of millions and millions of dollars a year. Very few paid workers. And that tradition is one of the reasons that's so. People who go into AA politics never get paid for it. AA politics is a whole different area over here. If you haven't experienced it, you might want to dip your toe in the water at least and see what it's like. Get to be a GSR, get to be a intergroup rep, start hobnobbing with the royalty, get to district meetings and see how wonderful it is to debate moot issues, which will never ever arrive at anybody's agenda. Go on up to area and get up in the higher, more rarefied atmosphere of AA politics. And there are people who stick around for years and years and years, and that's what their basic function in life is, to be an AA politician. And most of them are bucking to become a delegate. Now, I was a delegate, and I can tell you it ain't all that big a deal, because the delegates don't have any power either, any more than anybody else. I was thinking if I get to be a delegate, I can come back into my district and everybody will. No, it doesn't work that way.
Get 1,000 for the first step.
Yeah. But it was fun. And it's kind of an experience, as long as you don't take it too seriously. Because ultimately, it isn't the delegates, it isn't the conferences, it isn't the president of this and the secretary of that and the chairman of this or that. They can decide where to hold gratitude dinners, they can do all those things. But ultimately, when it comes down to what's really happening in AA, it's the loving God as He expresses Himself through group conscience. That's the only boss we have. I thought maybe I could become president for life or something, you know, but they didn't want to do that for me. I figured if I was made president for life, I could really straighten this outfit out.
Good, Emperor was good.
I was going to change my name to Bill Wilson III, you know. Didn't work. By the way, if any of you are allergic to smoke and you want to disappear back there, the mic is on. Okay, tradition 9. AA as such ought never be organized, but we may create service boards or committees directly responsible to those they serve. Here's what Bill wrote. The least possible organization. That's our universal ideal. No fees, no dues, no rules imposed on anybody. One alcoholic bringing recovery to the next. That's the substance of what we most desire, isn't it? But how shall this simple idea best be realized? Often a question that we have, for example, the kind of AA who is for simplicity. Terrified of anything organized, he tells us that AA is getting too complicated. He thinks money only makes trouble, committees only make dissension, elections only make politics, paid workers only make professionals, and clubs only coddle slippers. Says he, let's get back to coffee and cakes by cozy firesides. If any alcoholics stray our way, let's look after them, but that's enough. Simplicity is our answer. Quite opposed to such halcyon simplicity as the AA promoter. Left to himself, he would bang the cannon and twang the lyre at every crossroad of the world. Millions for drunks, great AA hospitals, batteries of paid organizers, publicity experts wielding all the latest paraphernalia of sound and script, which would be our promoter's dream. Yes, sir, he would bark. My 2-year plan calls for 1 million AA members by 1950. For one, I'm glad we have both conservatives and enthusiasts. They teach us much. Conservative will surely see to it that the AA movement never gets overly organized, but the promoter will continue to remind us of our terrific obligation to the newcomer, to those hundreds of thousands of alcoholics still waiting all over the world to hear of AA. Now that last sentence really describes Bill, and he was a consummate promoter. We shall naturally take the firm and safe middle course. AA has always violently resisted the idea of any general organization, yet paradoxically we have ever stoutly insisted upon organizing certain special services, mostly those absolutely necessary to effective and plentiful 12-step work. So now that's instructive, isn't it? It tells us that whatever organization we've indulged in AA ultimately goes back to the simple necessity for carrying the message. And of course that's what we're doing here. Our purpose in this workshop is to become more effective and more competent sponsors or carriers of the message, however you want to put it. Because that is precisely the purpose of AA. Let's hear this again. No fees, no dues, no rules. One alcoholic bringing recovery to the next. That's the substance of AA. I point that out because it's a clear assertion of a fact which we so often forget. Some of the New Age AA concepts would rely entirely upon the non-existent power of the group to get anybody sober. They think it comes out of the concept of encounter groups, the concept that we inherit from the human solutionists, that somehow or another we stay sober by going to a meeting and pulling down our drawers and exposing ourselves to the whole world. The idea being that you're only as sick as your secrets. We walk away feeling better temporarily, and everybody else is depressed from what they had to listen to. But it doesn't matter, and it doesn't work for anybody. AA was founded upon and still exists on the principle of one-on-one. That's why we're here. Sponsorship is one-on-one with the newcomer or with the old-timer who needs help. One-on-one. The big book defines sponsorship in one sentence only, and the word is never used, but the sentence is, both you and the new man must walk day by day in the path of spiritual progress. Two people growing spiritually together, one sharing his experience, strength, and hope with the other. The result is both grow spiritually. Remember again, if I fail to enlarge and perfect my spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others, I can't survive. If I don't give back what I've been given, it will rot within me. I've been given all this grace, and it's been enormous. But I have to give it away in order to keep it. Another great paradox. So in the ninth tradition, we're never to be organized in the traditional sense of that word. Now, if you were to venture into AA politics, you would think that there was some kind of a very highly organized superstructure here, beginning with district and then to area and then to New York. And then there's a kind of a stepchild thrown in there called intergroup. Now, intergroup is not part of the organization of AA, even though intergroups often mistake themselves as being somewhere in this hierarchy. They're not. Not all areas, not all towns or cities have an intergroup. And if they do, it's because the groups within that geographic area decide to get together and finance and sponsor an intergroup to take care of the needs of that particular area. The formal organization, if it be such, of AA is from New York down to area and then down to district. The district reports only to the groups, or the groups report to the district. If you want to get into that, you'll find that there are all of the makings of organization. Most of these areas and districts have sets of bylaws, and they all cater to and supposedly follow the 12 concepts of AA service. The truth is that for the most part they are places where people get together and form committees to do various things, and they can be a debating society, and there's a lot of fun, and every quarter there's a quarterly for a weekend, and many of the groups pony up the dough for their GSR to go and spend a weekend at a hotel and pay the transportation and all that stuff. We haven't done it here. We haven't had enough money to do it. This group pays its way, pays its bills, but pretty much stays poor otherwise. there's no requirement that the group pay the bills of the GSR, but many of them do. And it's kind of like, so I was a circuit speaker for 5 years, and that's a huge ego trip. I finally had to get out because it was too hard on me. I mean, I've got a bad enough ego as it is. But when you're a circuit speaker, you get flown around the country and around the world to various weekends, retreats, and roundups, and conferences, and so forth. And then when you get there, you know, your hotel's paid for, and somebody's going to buy you your meals, and you get to wear a badge, and you get to be a speaker, and you get to be a big shot. And it's very beguiling. But I've soon found out that circuit speakers they're kind of a breed apart. They all borrow from each other. Next time you go to a conference, listen to the speeches, and please understand that about half of what you're hearing has been borrowed from somebody else who borrowed it from somebody else, because this stuff is you know, it's either exciting or usually it's because it's funny.
Is that the AEF?
Yeah.
Alcohol exaggeration factor?
You got it. So I remember one example was kind of cute. There, somebody years and years ago started out with this story that his sponsor was this real rough-hewn fellow, this street person who had gotten sober, but was so humble he still lived in a cardboard box on the street. Ooh, everybody, ooh, that's really something. Well, this went on. It was picked up by one circuit speaker after another. Then finally somebody blew it totally. He was up there talking to 1,000 people, and he talking about his sponsor who lived in a cardboard box. And of course he said, but he had me call him every day. And that was before there were any cell phones, believe me. I guess he could have cleared it all up by saying that there was a payphone on the corner. I don't know. But it just got got the story a little bit too embellished there. So after a while, I just realized that I'd better, you know, for myself, I need to stick real close to where the action is. The big book says, stay on the firing line of life. And that's what I believe in. It works well for me. So we're going to be unorganized and glad of it. And it's the most interesting thing in the world to belong to a huge organization where nobody can tell you what to do and where there are no rules or regulations. The 10th tradition, Alcoholics Anonymous has no opinion on outside issues. Hence the AA name ought never be drawn into public controversy. Now this particular tradition has quite a history to it, and that history was very, very persuasive, even in the early days, because you see, we've talked about the Washingtonians before, that group in the 1800s. They were very successful. They got a lot of people sober. And by the time they'd been in existence, about 6 years, their membership roster was something like 100,000 people. They were preaching from all the pulpits, but see what they did. They made a lot of mistakes. But what finally killed off the Washingtonians, in spite of the fact that there were a lot of people getting sober, was that they embraced the cause of prohibition, which in those days was a political movement as well as a religious or moral movement. And not only did they embrace the cause, but they identified the Washingtonians with this whole idea of prohibition, and they spoke from the same pulpits where the prohibitionists spoke, and they had people come forward in the churches and take pledges of abstinence and so forth. They also identified their movement with the political movement, the Prohibition Party. And then they made a further mistake, because in those days the Abolition Party was starting to gain strength. The abolitionists in the North were becoming stronger and stronger, those who wanted to abolish slavery. And so the Washingtonians lent their name to the abolitionists and their prestige. But between the two of those things and other mistakes they'd made, the Washingtonians just blew apart. And there were still some people several years later who were identifying themselves as Washingtonians, but the power of the movement, the strength of the movement was gone. And so our guys learned from this, and they learned that they could have no opinion on outside issues as a group. That doesn't mean that we individually don't have very strong opinions, and rightly so, but they are not expressed as the opinion of AA. As a matter of fact, nobody ever has the right or the authority to express publicly, or in private for that matter, what the opinion of AA is on anything other than what we find in the Big Book. We have some very strong opinions about alcohol, alcoholism, spiritual bankruptcy, and how to recover. They're more than opinions, they are history, they are fact. But beyond that, now it's also interesting too, because a lot of people like to use this tradition as a way of defeating, for example, a movement within a group to ban smoking. And they will say, oh, well, that's an outside issue, and therefore it's not proper for us to be even considering it. Now, you have to look at the tradition carefully. We have no opinion on outside issues, hence the AA name ought never be drawn into public controversy. This tradition does not say that we don't have plenty to talk about among ourselves. And because something does not have a direct relationship to alcoholism, does not mean that it is a prohibited subject of conversation or decision-making within the group. Another tradition took care of that for us, didn't it? That each group should be autonomous, except in matters affecting other groups or AA as a whole. So A group has total autonomy to do as it pleases. This does not mean it's going to survive, because those who go too far outside the traditions will not survive. They will eventually fall on their swords and be gone. Alcoholism is a very, very, very powerful self-cleaning oven. And this is important to remember. The traditions function, have the same function within the fellowship and within the group as the steps do for we as individuals. That is to say that if we violate the principles of the steps, the consequences can be severe. And as a matter of fact, continual violation of the principles of the steps will almost inevitably result in our going back out. And the same thing is true of AA groups that violate the principles of the traditions. The consequences can be severe and almost always are. And so you will see very long established groups that simply fade away. They cease to exist. They cease to be relevant. And so at the public level, we are not going to lend the AA name to any outside concept, politics, function of any kind. We just simply don't lend our name to anybody. We'll cooperate with anybody, but we don't lend our name or our power or prestige. You will never see in AA a general appeal for the members of AA to do anything in terms of public issues. Now, there are plenty of politicians who would salivate at the idea of getting AA to start pushing its members to vote for them or for their particular hobby horse, their particular issue that they've been trying to push. AA simply won't do that. And as a result of that, we are very, very trusted. AA is trusted. We're trusted because we don't have our hand out. We're not asking for anything. We won't even accept anything. We don't ask for any kind of government handouts or any tax breaks, or we simply don't in any way require of others that they recognize us as being this super wonderful bunch of people getting drunk sober. We stay within ourselves. We take care of our own business. We offer ourselves and our service to anybody, but we don't demand or depend on anyone. And as a matter of fact, it's pretty well universally understood in the media, for example, that if you hear something from AA, you can pretty much take it to the bank. It's going to be true, because we're not out there pushing our own agenda. We're not trying to manipulate the press in any way. Oh, of course, there are individuals in AA, just you can expect that, who will do all kinds of crazy stuff. But people do trust the fellowship. And we've never, ever done anything to indicate that we have less than integrity in our dealings with the rest of the world. The 11th tradition, our public relations policy, is based on attraction rather than promotion. We need always maintain personal anonymity at the level of press, radio, and films. Well, please remember that none of the traditions is fear-based. When you're around the meetings, you may, especially if you're new, you may get the idea that anonymity is the way we protect ourselves from the outside world. That otherwise, if they knew about us, if they knew that we were drunks, that we would be put at a terrible disadvantage, we would be ridiculed, we'd be stomped down, might not get the job we wanted, and on and on and on and on, all this stuff. And in some societies, that's undoubtedly true. I spent a good deal of time in South America, and in one country there, I spent a lot of time in AA in that country, and I can tell you that meetings were secret cells, and anonymity was strictly enforced. You did not break the anonymity of anybody down there. They very likely break your head. It was because their society, it was okay to be drunk, but it's not okay to be a drunk, to be an alcoholic. You could, as long as you could handle your liquor, and you're just, that was wonderful. And as a matter of fact, alcohol was ubiquitous, was everywhere down there. I remember one time I was up in the Andes and I was traveling by myself, and I was looking for a particular place up there, a farm, and I wanted to take a look at some of their horses. And I got lost, and I wandered into this little village, just asked directions. And there was a cantina there, and there was a round table out on the sidewalk, what passed for a sidewalk, on the side of the road. And a whole bunch of guys sitting around this round table. And they were campesinos or maybe cowboys, I don't know what they were, but every one of them had a gun. Some of them had rifles, many of them had pistols strapped to their hips or stuck in the back of their belt. And they're all sitting around drinking. And they were drinking the national drink of this particular country, which is called aguardiente. It's a very powerful white lightning kind of stuff with a licorice taste, the anisette taste. And they drink it with 7-Up, lemon, 7-Up, and aguardiente. big time heavy duty stuff. I was probably around 120 proof, I guess. So anyway, I went over to ask them where to find this particular farm, and they asked me to have a drink. Well, now, it's almost a mortal sin in that particular country to refuse to drink with somebody. And here are about 10 of them sitting around with guns. And I thought, oh man, you've had it now. You're dead either way, you know. you take a couple of slugs of aguardiente and you'll probably never see another day. But if you don't, you probably won't see another hour. So in my pidgin Spanish, I had to explain to them that alcohol that was poison to me, that it would kill me. Now I have to tell you, there was dead silence. I thought, oh man, I've had it now. And then one of these guys started laughing. Another one started laughing. Pretty soon the whole table was laughing. They were pointing at me, and you know they were saying some pretty unkind things about me, but at least they weren't killing me. But you see, how could you? I caught the word puta and a few other things. One of them said, "Bésame culo." Anyway, I heard all this stuff, but I was very delighted. And finally, one of them told me how to get to this farm, so I left quickly. But there, to refuse to drink was almost a terrible insult. And to not be able to hold your liquor, see, I finally figured out that's why the anonymity was so important there, because it didn't say, I'm a drunk, it said I can't hold my booze. So it was a direct insult to manhood. They didn't care if women were members of it didn't make any difference to anybody. But the guys snuck around, and most of the meetings were like in church basements and places down dark alleys and stuff. So anyway, that was kind of fun. The idea here, though, of 11th tradition is anonymity at what level? At the public level. The anonymity was never, ever considered to be something to be maintained among the members of the group. I can tell you that I know and have met thousands of people in AA. And I don't know the last names of more than 15 or 20 people. I sponsor a lot of people right now, and half of them I don't know their last name. And this is a serious drawback. What if somebody's ill and somebody's in the hospital, and you call over at some hospital with 1,000 beds and say, I want to talk to Joe. Joe who? Joe M. What's his last name? I don't know. What's he in for? I don't know. And so we disable ourselves. The funny part about it is that this has become such a custom that we introduce ourselves by our first names only, that people who break that custom are the ones who are looked down on. You know, what are you trying to be, a big shot or something? You know, that kind of stuff. And so very seldom does anybody ever mention their last names, even in a meeting. And yet there's nothing in the tradition would suggest that we're to do that. It's clear that we do not break the anonymity of people who do not want their anonymity broken. We're very careful about that. And if we don't know for a fact, then we just don't do it. But there are plenty of people like me. I don't care who knows that I'm an alcoholic. I wear a medallion all the time, regardless of where I am. And I do it not because I'm trying to advertise anything about myself, except that I am a member. It's amazing how many times people come up and talk to me. And I've met a lot of people that way, and some of them I've been able to help. So I have no qualms about it, but there are many people who don't want it known. We must respect that. But this is just the kind of respect you give as the kind of courtesy that you would expect to do in an outfit where unity was so valuable. But it is not a tradition. It is not a tradition that we go by our first names only among ourselves. It's clear from the 11th tradition that this is to be at the level of press, radio, films, and of course now TV. And then attraction rather than promotion needs a couple of comments too. People have twisted that around to mean that we don't, when we're working, let's say one-on-one, that we're supposed to only show recovery, not to try to push it off on anybody. And that's not true. I mean, we read the 7th chapter tells us exactly what to do. It tells us that we are to see if there's enough interest. We'll tell them exactly how we recovered. Exactly, precisely how we recovered. This whole book is based on the idea that by publishing this book, which shows the recovery methods used by the first 100, that this book would be able to carry the message and it would be able to reach out to people who otherwise would never know. So this book is based on knowledge, history, and in a sense it's all promotion. What this is really talking about is at the public level. We do not promote ourselves in public. If you remember that that's what it's limited to, then you'll be able to properly teach your sponsees, and you won't get confused about what's going on around the rooms. And then finally, anonymity is the spiritual foundation of all our traditions. It will remind us to place principles before personality. This tradition is bandied about in many meetings as somehow or another relating to anonymity being a matter of fear, that we stay anonymous out of fear of discovery, that if we don't stay anonymous somehow or another we're not spiritual. The truth is that the 12th tradition is based entirely on the principle of self-sacrifice. That is humility. And it relates only to the use of our last names, and the purpose of the 12th tradition is for us to constantly be reminded that God's running the show, that its principles, which have been rewritten or retranslated into the steps, that this is where all the power is. That we're not here to claim that we have power at all, except that we've derived from God. And by not using our last names, we avoid the natural human tendency to want to be given a lot of claim, a lot of credit. We avoid the human necessity, the human inclination always to blow our own horn, to build ourselves up in the eyes of others. So you see, what we're doing here, when it talks about self-sacrifice, what it really means is that we're sacrificing this normal human desire, need, and want to be recognized and to be thought kindly of. And if when we don't use our last names, then we remain anonymous, and we sacrifice to that extent. It also, of course, reflects humility, and that's critically important. Bill made a big point of humility all the way through his writings because, see, he recognized that when we are feeling humble, it is not that we are feeling less than anybody in among our human relations, but humility really relates to what we learn when we get to the 10th step, that God has all knowledge and all power. Now, if you stop and think about it from that standpoint, if God has all power, how much power does that leave for us? And so whatever power we have is derivative, it is gift, it comes to us. And once we acknowledge that, then we can stop taking credit for the things which God has wrought. We can take credit only for those things which we have done. There's a big difference. You see, the difference is that we don't take credit for the results. We leave those up to God. We can take credit for the fact that using our willpower, we get ourselves to take right action. I see nothing wrong with that. But humility is something which keeps us down to our right side, keeps us understanding that God has all knowledge, God has all power. The results must be left to God. Our job is to do the next right thing as it presents itself, to do what's on our plate to be done, and leave the results up to Him. And when we do that, our days work just fine. So please don't misunderstand the 12th tradition. It is not the tradition which speaks of the fear of discovery. It's the tradition which speaks of the fear of pride and ego taking charge of our lives. And the idea is that if that were to happen, the fellowship could be seriously damaged and disunited. Okay, so that's the end of another cycle, Billy. How many? 5 now?
I would say more, actually.
Oh, I don't know.
It's 2 a year for 4 years.
Yeah. So anyway, that's the end of a cycle. Next week, what we'll do is we're going to start all over again. And we'll spend a couple of weeks just talking about sponsorship, what sponsorship is, what it's not, what the basis of sponsorship is. We're going to spend a lot of time on the myths of sponsorship. We're going to blow a lot of stuff out of the water. It doesn't have any business being in a sponsorship's in a sponsor's way of doing business with the sponsees. A lot of this stuff is just flat wrong, and we'll examine all of that. We'll also be looking to see what sponsorship is and what we actually do as sponsors and how we do it. And after we've done that, then we'll get into the big book and we will find out where everything is in the big book and how it all ties together with everything else so that we can teach the book. And after we do that, then we'll go back and we'll go through the steps, one step at a time, and learn how to teach the steps. And we've got literature on that that'd be helpful, I think. And when we finish with that, then we go back and we'll look at the traditions again. And that's it. And if you did something about it and hurt them, then you write about that too, and then you make amends quickly. All you got to do is remember the 10th step is 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 12.
12 and 10 steps?
Sure, resolutely turn our thoughts to someone we can help.
Okay. So let's say you have a list of 14 things on there. Let's say it wasn't your best day.
14?
Whatever. Maybe
Well, that would be a pretty active day for sure. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you need to have talked to somebody about them and asked God for help with them. Take away those defects.
If you're doing this at night,
You're not doing it at night. You do as you do go through the day. That's why you carry your little notebook with you.
Well, I thought using that information to do that inventory.
Well, that's a different inventory. That's the 11th step inventory. That's when you go back to the day and you check up on yourself.
Do you have 2 pads in it, or?
Yeah, you got a journal. I keep a journal.
So you have one for a 10th step and one for an 11th?
Sure. The reason is you don't want to have to walk around with a big journal all day long writing in it. I know people who do that, but mostly you don't. You just have a little 3x5 pad.
What would you put in the...
No, you write it down. You don't tape record it.
What would you put on the 11th step?
Well, there are 10 questions to answer. You answer them every night. Page 86. Okay, guys, let's get started.